Sunshine called me up, and my assignment was to think about things looking forward. And I was aware of the fact that we were at the end of the day, and I assume that journalists are interested in things that might be controversial. So I gave Sunshine three topics. I said, this is the one that could get me in most trouble. She said, oh, perfect. Talk about this one. So it turns out that dam removals become a bigger and bigger issue all over the country. And we're seeing it in Rhode Island, we're seeing it in Massachusetts, it's going in right now. And what you'll discover is that often when a dam is getting ready to remove, not always, local communities can flare in a big way. And so I think what you'll find is there are ecological values, and there's a big push that way. There can also be a lot of pushback. The group that's usually involved, one way or another, is NOAA. It may be NRCS, it may be a local community, but somewhere as you start working your way through, you'll find that NOAA is often involved in dam removals. And we have some interesting situations here. Remember, here we are, right there. See all that nice red? Birthplace of the Industrial Revolution. What was prompting the Industrial Revolution? Water power. So we have dams everywhere. Little area over here in Pennsylvania. I was just down at Bethlehem, and I discovered they can consider themselves also the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution. As of, I think someplace up here in Massachusetts makes the same claim. But nevertheless, we've got a lot of dams here. So why did they go in? And they're still going in globally. Navigation, locks. You go to England and Europe and you see all the different navigation. Hydropower, still a big issue, and everybody is still wondering, are we going to have some component of Rhode Island's energy coming in from big hydropower or small hydropower? I don't know where that's all going to shake out. Flood control, no question about it. It's always been a big area, and there are different kinds of dams. Domestic water supply, that's what we've been talking about today. Water for crop irrigation. Mostly what Ken talked about was not dams. He was talking about scooping water out of the ground in certain kind of geological settings where the groundwater's there and essentially just intercepting that. And then recreational values, lots of stuff for swimming, whatever. So the question is, there's a lot of negative effects of dams. The big one that's driven NOAA has been barriers to spawning and feeding habitat for our fish, either that spawn up in the rivers or live their main life. Remember, eels are a little weird because they spawn out in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean and then spend their lives up in the rivers. So most of us think about salmon, herring, whatever. And so here's something from Maine. The river herring's just been there was a massive crash in the population, and a lot of people felt that the dams, which were inhibiting their movement up, was the reason for that. So there's been a big emphasis on barriers to spawning. Sometimes people just think about the whole ecosystem, not just the fish. And when we have dams, we change a riverine habitat essentially to more of a lake habitat. But one of the interesting things about reservoirs and dams, and it's some of the problem that we have actually up in Roger Williams, those are mostly artificial waterways. Those are dams, they're reservoirs, and one of the things that happens is when you dam a river with its floodplain and it looks like a lake, it starts to revert back to looking like a marsh or wetland, whatever, and it's just the process will turn itself back into a highly productive vegetated area. But so it's part of what we're dealing with sometimes when we look at some of these problems that we have in the state. It's rivers that got changed to lakes that are trying to revert naturally back to a very different system. So it's some of the stuff we're dealing with. Problems with warm water, again, it can affect all the aquatic ecosystem. A lot of different issues with timing and quantity of downstream waters. Classic issues have to do with India controlling the water of Bangladesh. Whenever we look globally, and now we're hearing a lot about the Colorado River and everybody trying to hold water back, Rio Grande. We don't see it so much here, but it's a big issue. And then we've got this issue of safety and risk. We really learned about it in 2010. People got really worried, look here's all the US dams by owners. See that big giant bar? That's privately controlled dams. I think there's some politician, I'll look right at him, who I think owns one of our dams, and he's held us hostage, if I'm not mistaken, because what's going to happen, he's going to either drain the lake or whatever, because we got to pay him. So it's a nice thing about being tenured. So we got an issue here. We got private dams. Yes, sir. Who? I don't know. That's a nice thing about being a faculty member. I have no idea what his name is, but he's out there somewhere. You'll find him, I promise. Okay, so what are the controversies? Local communities discover that maybe a dam's going to get taken out. And so many people who are environmental oriented, who are interested in fish habitat, often have been caught by surprise that there can be local controversy. For sure, people are going to worry about how they're going to finance it, what are the costs going to be, but people often rev up over this one. Their pond has been around since 1780, since 1820. It's the part of the fabric of what their community is. And the idea that this is going to go from a pond to, it's their kind of historic mill pond, to a lake, we're talking recreational, historic, cultural, a lot of things like that. And so that's sometimes a complicated thing to deal with. There's also habitat alterations, going from lakes as well as backing up behind the lake. Sometimes there's some interesting habitats that are there. Sometimes you'll find Atlantic white cedar. Changes in property values. So I used to have a place that was along the waterway. Now I don't. Now I'm along a floodplain. So what do I think about that? There are issues where if I have a groundwater well, this is a private well, and I have my well and the water level behind the dam is quite high, I can have a well that's maybe 15 feet deep, I have plenty of water. The dam gets taken out, essentially we don't have all that water piled up. Guess what? My well dries up. And so sometimes NOAA discovers that this issue stops dam removal, and it happened actually in the Pawcatuck watershed, that this was the issue that stopped a dam from being taken out. Then there's this big one that Jan started to talk about. We're the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution, and we have the legacy of the Industrial Revolution. Most of the controls on pollution kicked into gear somewhere in the 70s and kind of picked up after that, and we know that we had all kinds of jewelry industry, lots of heavy metals. We've got a lot of sins. I'm good. We have a lot of sins inside of our sediment. So the question is, when we take all the sediment behind the dam, what are we going to do with it? How are we going to make sure it doesn't end up downstream? Because a lot of the sediments are actually buried, and they're relatively stable. So we always have issues to deal with when we're dealing with release. So it's just some of the complexities to deal with. Jim Turek, he's the main guy to talk to for restoration, and he was pointing out to me, because one of the issues that people bring up is what about habitat? I got this from him, and his data is that when we remove dams, it tends to restore rarer habitat types. So this is what we think of in a reservoir, and you'll see we've got plenty of places that look like that in Rhode Island. Those are a certain kind of open water wetland. When that dam was removed, it created more of a shrub wetland, basically a floodplain along a river system. That tends to be a more rare habitat. It's the kind of thing that they're trying to move forward with. Then I wanted to mention one more thing. At the same time that we're having dam removal, which is being pushed in a big way by NOAA, and usually on larger river systems, usually not on the smallest one, we're seeing the beavers are coming back. And they're coming back in a huge way. Not just here in Rhode Island, everywhere. And so what are we going to do about that? And how is the community going to be handling this whole issue of beavers? Because they're creating flooding, they're altering habitat, and they generate a lot of ecological functions, but they're flooding people's backyard, they're preventing water from moving downstream. And so we're going to see this one starting to pop up. Are we going to control them? Are we going to let them go? And you're going to see a lot of local issues with both dam removal and beavers. That's my pitch. I think I'm done.